G'day YouTubers, how are ya? Was here. Well, today I want to talk about suspension, and you'll see on a lot of videos out there in the YouTube world there's quite a few complaints about the MT-10 suspension, and it got me thinking. And one of the things about where I've come from is I've come from, I guess, cruiser bikes that have had a bit of suspension and tidy up. But I mean, when I get onto this here, I actually thought the suspension was pretty good. And after making a few inquiries, one of the people I spoke to said that the suspension on these isn't that good, and they've had trouble tuning them, and they felt like you needed to upgrade your suspension. $3 later, you're upgrading your suspension, and everyone goes, oh yeah, it's trick, it's this, it's that. But what is the matter with the R1 suspension in these? 30mm front end tubes. I mean, the super bikes when they come out only had 20s, right, in the beginning. I mean, this 30mm front end come out in, I don't know, 2000s. You'd know better than me. But I mean, this is R1 suspension. You've got 3 or 4 adjustable things in the back here, and you've got 3 adjustable dubulackers in the front. Okay, so with my knowledge, which you can tell isn't that much, it's just how it feels, I felt this bike handled pretty good. But in all honesty, without that full experience and the information on the internet, I thought the best way to find out whether your R1 suspension works is to go to someone that knows what they're talking about. XXX rated suspension. So I went there, and old mate said to me, he said, "Wazza, nothing wrong with the suspension on the MT-10. Fully tunable. It's R1 suspension. Fully tunable, dude." So he did a tune, and in the coming video you'll see about the tune, and you'll see that the suspension on these are rated R1 suspension. And he's got some interesting points of view, and I might add that when he does refurbishment of suspension, and he talks about racing suspension, you know, and because that's what he is, he specializes in racing bikes and making them winners. And if you go to this guy's Facebook site, you'll see all of the winners that he's got by simply using his XXX rated suspension. A big shout out also to Brisbane MT-10 Club. Now, I post the question up there on that particular forum and got a lot of responses, and a few of the people recommended XXX rated suspension, tuned suspension. So when I went down to see him, he's a nice bloke. We'll go into the video, and I just wanted to say, is the suspension on these adequate? Yes, it is. Can it be tuned? Yes, it can. Don't take my word for it. Listen to old mate. Alright, g'day YouTubers, how are you? Was here. Alright. There's a lot of stuff on the internet and forums talking about suspension and how it's not that flash on the MT-10. As I've said, that I find suspension pretty good. And for me, the Brisbane MT-10 forum recommended XXX rated racing suspension tuning, Chris Jones. There's his card. Okay, so today we're going to set this bike up, and I'm going to get Chris to go through a bit of information on it. Cheers.
So in your video, what you want to do is point to these double lock nuts and say, why is it that in 2018 we've got to use something from the 1900s to adjust our suspension?
Okay. Those little spanners.
Well, say this was an Olin shock, it'd have a hydraulic preload adjuster on it, right?
Yep.
So for the money that you pay for this suspension, or the bike, that's got, you know, this is R1 suspension in the MT-10.
Yep.
Why is it that we're still using double lock nuts to adjust the suspension? It's last century's, you know, 1900 stuff.
I suppose it's the price.
Yeah, that's it. You can't tell me. What are they going to save by not putting a proper preload adjuster system on here? They're going to save maybe $100 on 10,000 units. That's a lot of money, but
Still, it'd be better if it was.
yeah, that's just one of, you know, like you said, you can take this bike, you can plug in an interface, you can tune everything on this bike is tunable, yet to do the suspension tuning, you've got
to buy an SP.
You're in the dark ages.
Yeah, true. So is that why they sort of upgraded the SP? You spend that extra $3-4 grand and get the SP, which is computerized.
Look, in my opinion, the dynamic suspension is just, look, it's not that it's no good, but there's not a single race bike that uses it, so it's not great. It's more of a gimmick.
Okay.
Sorry.
Don't bother spending the money, really.
Well, look, for a guy that knows nothing about suspension, if you buy a bike and it's got dynamic suspension, then that takes away him having to think about suspension, because it does it automatically.
Yep.
But
which is a good thing.
But in reality, you still have to go and get your sag set. And most people that bring me their dynamic suspension, we set it on race, so as it's fixed anyway.
Yep.
But if they're going to go touring, then we change it back to dynamic, because the sags are already set. Like, dynamic suspension can't set its own sag measurement. It still has to get set. So it's not, but like I said, if it was good, they wouldn't take it out of the R1M and change it to a normal conventional suspension setup for the racetrack. They'd be racing on it, but nobody does, so that answers its question for performance.
Yep. At the moment we're measuring sag, so they take a measurement on the back and front to find out how much sag and how much spring and preload and all that stuff you've got, and then they work out the numbers to see if it suits your weight. XXX suspension, nice little sticker. So the reality is that these bikes, actual fact, have R1 suspension that can be tuned to match your riding ability. So that's something that sort of people don't talk about. How do you ride versus how your suspension's set up? So that was the main thing I learned today. If you're a tourer, Chris has told me that you set your suspension up a bit softer. If you're more of a spirited rider, you'll set your suspension up a little bit firmer to relate to that. But your suspension is not set up to go straight to the racetrack and compete. The actual fact, you have to get your suspension and fully modify it, and even if you upgrade to better suspension, if you still want to go to the racetrack, that still has to be fixed up, tuned up and adjusted. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah, like when you watch MotoGP or World Superbike and they have, let's say they have 4 1-hour practice sessions before they race, they're setting the suspension to suit the track. Like, they might be changing springs, changing valving, but they're dialing the suspension in to suit that track and to suit, you know,
temperature and
everything
altitude
that goes with it.
Yep.
So it's the same. Like, you know, it doesn't matter what suspension you put in a bike, and that's why, you know, every track is different. That's why at every track they have to set it up to, you know, you don't just put suspension in the bike and then it's set like for one track suits all.
Yep.
So
I've taken this to Lakeside, and then I've taken this bike to Ipswich Raceway.
Yep.
They're two really different tracks. I'd say Lakeside is more corners, short and bumpier, whereas the Ipswich one is they're longer straights. So the suspension would be tuned differently on a race bike. But on these, we're just basically looking for a sort of like a blunt overall.
yeah, we're setting the sags to suit the rider, and then we set the clickers basically to suit the rider's preference. Like if you're just riding the bike to work and back is different to if you're riding the bike at a track day or
Yep. Softer setup for touring.
yeah.
So how was this bike set up? Because I've always said I found the suspension reasonably good.
Look, I haven't checked the clickers yet, but the sag measurement, both sag measurements were out by about 12 mil front and rear, and because it's progressive suspension, the further you get into the stroke the harder it is. So this bike will actually feel softer now that we've got it out of the hard part of the stroke.
Yep.
And yeah, it'll be a much more pleasant bike to ride, and it'll be more nimble.
Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot.
Alright, get your jump back on again.
Yep. So do you need to upgrade your suspension and spend $3,000 on it? Well, if you are racing the bike continually, yes, but then you have to put into account, you have to customize that suspension, which we talked about before. So what is the point? Most people aren't able to use all of this power unless you're an elite rider and you're specifically orientated to that track. These are a road bike, so let's have fun, tune our suspension and get to town.
Alright, you jump back on there again.
Sag's done.
Yep. So the main thing when you're setting your sags is, let's say you weighed 130 kilos.
Yep.
The sag measurement is not going to be achievable with this spring. Means, you know, like it's just another way to show that you've got to go to a heavier spring for a heavier person. The fact that we can achieve the sag measurement within the correct parameters here indicates that this spring is acceptable for your weight.
Right. And so is there some allowance you need to make it for race gear that you put on? Not really, is it? Just blunt instrument. So
Look,
it's 85 k's away, maybe 90 you set it up for with weight.
well, I'm setting this up to suit your weight, and it's going to be, like I said, you'll notice straight away, like before this bike had to be squatting in the rear, say from the apex to the exit of the turn. If you're really getting on the gas, because it was set so soft in the back, it had to squat in the rear, and then it's going to run wide on the exit of the turn.
I did notice I was running wide, but I thought it was my inexperience.
Because the bike wasn't set.
And yes, okay. Well, there you go. So I noticed that the last track day I did with the battle axe Bridgestones, that the rear end started shimmying a little bit. Would that due to the tyres, or would that be due to the suspension?
See how that's scalloped in under here?
Yeah.
And it's raised here?
I did see that. That's a last.
They're telltale signs that your rebound's incorrect.
Okay. There you go. And I thought it was pretty good. So it's even it's interesting.
Alright, just get you to hang on to the bars. I'm going to pull that stand out.
Yep.
Will be set a bit firmer
Okay, so
for the heavier braking.
if you ride a little bit more spirited, you want to set your clickers a bit firmer.
See how fast the rebound action is. What that means is when it's set quite fast like that, when you're trail braking into the corner and you come off the brake, I don't know if you've noticed it, but you feel as you come off the brake and transition to the throttle, the front tries to lift up.
Does a little bit.
Yeah, which means now you can't keep the same arc through the corner, and you've actually got to make a correction to get through the corner. And that's all because the rebound's set way too fast here for the
So when we adjusted these big nuts here,
that's the preload, so as we can get the correct sag measurement in the front. Now we're setting the rebound, and then we'll set the compression.
you put a little bit of plastic over them just to stop the nuts from being damaged, which
See
I
the
thought was
difference
good.
now how the front is more controlled. It's not as fast in the
Looks a bit
rebound
softer.
now.
Jesus, it's a good looking bike.
Yeah, they're a good looking bike, alright.
Fuck yeah.
You also notice that the front was quite divey, what I call divey in the front when you're on the brake. Trying to slow that action down, so we've got more control over the bike. We've got a little bit more. Alright, so we'll do the rear. So I'm just going to get you to hang on to the front of the bike while if you can stand around the front.
Yep.
Hang on to the two mirrors. There, yeah. Now I'm just going to bounce on the back and see it's like a pogo stick.
Yep.
We're going to change that. That's just showing it's got very little control over the spring. The spring's more or less got no control at all.
Okay. So is that doing this chamber here, or is that the spring that we need to do?
The actual spring, like all the hydraulic component of the shop does, is control how quickly it compresses and how quickly it extends again. Well, this one here had very little control. It's just like bouncing on a spring that's just on its own.
Okay. Jesus, that's fair way in, isn't it? About 1.5
That's the high speed adjustment.
Yep. So that was set on about 6 turns or something, was it?
I was set on 3.5 turns out, which I feel is a little bit excessive for sports riding.
Oh, and then there's a little screw on the inside as well.
Yeah, that's the low speed adjuster.
Oh wow.
Okay, get you to hang on to the front again. What we should see now is when we bounce the bike, it's a lot more controlled. See? Very precise.
Wow. It's going to be supersonic.
Massive change.
Well, there you go. Just goes to show you, I had no idea.
A little bit more here. Alright, another bounce on there. Just lean that into me a bit.
That does look better.
Yeah, before it was just like a bouncy spring. That's what I was saying. Like you could even tell by the mark in your tyre that there was no control over it. So it's just,
Oh, all right. Well,
heaps better now.
that's done. Well, I guess the next thing is to trial it now. So let's go for a little run through the hills and take our time and get used to these new changes. So again, if you're looking for suspension and you're in Brisbane, Chris Jones, XXX rated suspension. We are going to test it out now, and then I'll finish off this video with my thoughts on that. thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks, mate.
Very kind of you.